Donald Trump and Mark Carney, the newly elected Prime Minister of Canada, had their much anticipated meeting here in Washington, D.C. today. I want to take a look first here at one of the most interesting exchanges, and it's the exchange that a lot of people are focusing on. I think it's interesting for reasons that kind of cut against the media's framing of what happened. So let's take a look here at Donald Trump, Mark Carney in the Oval Office in front of reporters talking about whether Canada will ever become the 51st state.
As you know from real estate, there are some places that are never for sale.
That's true.
We're sitting in one right now, Buckingham Palace that you visited as well.
That's true.
Having met with the owners of Canada over the course of the campaign last several months, it's not for sale, won't be for sale ever. But the opportunity is in the partnership and what we can build together. And we have done that in the past. And part of that, as the president just said, is with respect to our own security. And my government is committed for a step change in our investment in Canadian security and our partnership. And I'll say this as well, that the president has revitalized international security, revitalized NATO, and us playing our full weight in NATO, and that will be part of it.
That's true. And they have.
Okay, so there is no question that it's a courageous thing for Mark Carney to come into the Oval Office in front of the American press and, as the leader of a much smaller country, say, hey, that thing you've been talking about and bragging about, it's not going to happen. And quote, he said, it won't be for sale ever, referring, of course, to Canada. And that's what most people are saying. They're sort of framing this as a total own, that Donald Trump kind of just got dunked on in his own office. And this was just a brilliant move from Mark Carney, a very powerful move from Mark Carney. And to be clear, there's some truth to that. As I just said, he's from a less powerful country. There's no question about that. But I want to be clear. If you're just seeing the clips of this, the entire meeting was very, very friendly. And not just, Donald Trump being friendly to Mark Carney, but Mark Carney being friendly to Donald Trump. You heard it actually at the end of that clip. Mark Carney was being very clever. I think he's maybe learned a little something from Claudia Sheinbaum, who at least until this week had very deftly managed her relationship with Donald Trump by, with some flattery and also some substance. So Sheinbaum, for example, has worked on or has done a lot of substantive action in Mexico since Donald Trump came into office to augment the U.S.'s efforts to stop the flow of fentanyl, crack down on cartels, helped with border security and all of that from their end. Carney there, you heard him talk about how Donald Trump has revitalized NATO, which is a great way to give him an olive branch in this broader context of the relationship between both countries. And I just also have to emphasize the flattery went in both directions. Trump made a quip about how he probably got Carney elected, obviously because he kind of tanked the prospects of Pierre Poilievre. There were a lot of other things happening, but there's no doubt that Donald Trump put Poilievre in a situation where his numbers, it was a pretty difficult situation for Poilievre to be in. Carney ran on an anti-Trump ticket, as did Poilievre, for the most part, after Trump began his 51st state joking and his tariffs and all of that. Well, I actually don't know if it's a joke or not, but you saw Trump, if you were watching this, you saw Trump's face in that video. He kind of grimaced when it was sort of a grin/grimace, a grinmas, if you will, when Carney said that Canada it won't be for sale ever. But I actually think that moment, again, the media is sort of clipping it out of context and zipping it around the internet as though it was some type of own. But Carney was very flattering to Donald Trump. They both talked about how this friendship is always going to remain strong, and it's such an important friendship, and they have so many mutual interests. But they both maintained their positions. And this is what's always so interesting about Donald Trump. He, was asked what in particular they might talk about in a deal. He mentioned automobiles and energy as two big examples. And you can see actually where in a conversation about USMCA and what kind of deal might be reached with Canada, how those would be two sticking points on the table when they're speaking privately. And we'll see what's to come from that. I mean, I don't know what the contours even broadly of this deal might look like. Trump was also asked if there was anything Carney could say that would change his mind on the tariffs, and he said no. Is there anything, this is a reporter says, is there anything Carney can say to you in the course of your meeting today that gets you to lift the tariffs on Canada? Trump says no. And then the reporter says, why not? Trump says, that's just the way it is. And I mean, lift tariffs on Canada is one question, but if it means lift all tariffs on Canada, obviously Trump's answer there is probably the permanent answer. Is almost definitely the permanent answer. But if it's negotiate on tariffs, which is most likely the case, I think Carney sort of recognizes the inevitability of that, and I think it was similar with Claudia Scheinbaum, and they realize that they're now in a position, as Trump said to Zelensky, where Trump has the cards. And what they need to do is get the best possible deal out of Donald Trump. And the way to get the best possible deal out of Donald Trump is not continuing to talk about him in the way Carney campaigned domestically. And it's actually, to be able to do both. And I think that grinmas, as we just talked about, that you saw from Donald Trump, was reflective of him knowing that Carney has to do what he has to do domestically, because otherwise, there's the Canadian population, similar to Mexican voters, for example, are sensitive about sovereignty. They don't want to be bullied by Donald Trump. They want to stand up to Donald Trump. They certainly want to see the prime minister that they just elected stand up to Donald Trump. So that was, again, I actually thought that exchange, if it's striking people as being representative of the meeting, it's not, in the way that it is representative. Well, let me put it this way. I think that exchange was representative of the meeting, not in the way that the headline or the quotes being pulled out of it that just focus on Carney, sort of, smacking Trump down in his own office suggest. Because if you keep listening, if you listen to the whole exchange, the whole presser, what you saw was actually a deeply deferential Carney who was clever about putting his foot down in a polite and civil way when he felt he needed to. And I'm sure that's sincere for him, not just the politics of appealing to the Canadian population, but went back and forth too. Trump said he's followed Carney's career. They, seem to suggest that they'll both get along well. We don't know what's to come. I just want to point out this thread from Megan Casella of CNBC. She said, in a long monologue in the Oval Office beside Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, the president Trump appears to say that the trade, quote, deals his team are working on are not deals in the traditional sense, as they will not have to be signed. He says the U.S. does not care about accessing foreign markets. He says, we don't care about their market. They want a piece of our market. And the deal will be naming, quote, the price that people are going to have to pay to shop in the United States. This is more from Trump, quote, think of us as a super luxury store, a store that has the goods. You're going to come and you're going to pay a price, and we're going to give you a very good price. We're going to make very good deals. And in some cases, we'll adjust, but that's where it is. So we can just sit down, and I'll do this at some point over the next 2 weeks. We're going to sit down. We're going to put very fair numbers down, and we're going to say, here's what this country, what we want. And congratulations, we have a deal. And they'll either say great, and they'll start shopping, or they'll say not good. We're not going to do it. I said, that's okay. You don't have to shop. Now, Casella, who's the Washington correspondent for CNBC, her takeaway is, quote, this is highly confusing, but it's the latest insight we have as to how the president is thinking about the path forward on tariffs. By naming a price for countries to pay to shop in the U.S., it appears he wants some tariff to remain in place, possibly with everyone. So that would be that 10% global tariff potentially. And she says it downplays what to expect in terms of, quote, deals. What Trump is describing won't bring the certainty markets, investors, businesses have been looking for. It's hard to make a long-term investment based on an unsigned agreement that's subject to change again. Now, I mean, I'm not so sure that we can rule out whether this ultimately gets inked, whether whatever these deals are ultimately get inked. It seemed like a riff from Trump, actually, as Casella picks up on as well. And so maybe there is an opportunity for certainty that doesn't emerge from that particular Trump riff. She's absolutely right that the certainty is what's important for investors. I mean, if we were thinking about how he pointed out auto and energy as two particular areas where he's interested in fairer trade between the US and Canada. Remember also, we've mentioned this a couple times on the show, a big part of the tax package that Donald Trump is pushing, that Scott Bessent is pushing on Capitol Hill to be signed in the next couple of months. They want it to involve a 100% write off on building, manufacturing, factory expenses retroactive to January 20th. So that's a little bit of an industrial policy there. And they want, I think, a big write off for auto loans as well. So there you go. When we're talking about cars, that would be an important part of it too. So they're starting to get this to congeal. But it's taking time. It's taking quite a bit of time. And people are trying to make decisions, obviously, about the futures of their businesses right now. And so whether Trump has the time to go on this way, he obviously thinks he does, because he believes that all of the cards are in the hands of the United States. Now, if it goes on long enough, what he has to be very careful about is other countries immediately aligning with China and sort of putting those processes in motion and you disentangling themselves from the United States and starting to just bet more heavily on China. Obviously, a lot of countries don't want to do that. But to Casella's point, obviously there's some measure of certainty that businesses are looking for amidst all of this, with that tax bill potentially not coming for another couple of months, and nobody knows whether it actually will get passed. They have really slim margins in the House of Representatives, Republicans do, so that could be a legitimate problem. But it was interesting in this meeting with Mark Carney to see what is clearly a better relationship from Trump and Trudeau, who obviously Trudeau went down to Mar-a-Lago after Trump was reelected and kissed the ring in a way that infuriated a lot of people in his country. So then he swung back as Donald Trump kind of ratcheted up his rhetoric, because Trump also made him look foolish. So Trudeau's only option was to swing back. That really permanently soured their relationship. And so Trump seems to think he can have a better relationship with Mark Carney, sort of a clean slate in Canada, if you will. Maybe that's the case. I mean, this meeting would be a good indication. Obviously, what Casella is pointing out here is, quote, highly confusing, to borrow her phrase, but it should be reassuring. And if you're looking to see whether the U.S. and Canada can still do some business. But I actually thought, from the perspective just of politics, both of these guys did exactly what they needed to do in a very high pressure, high stakes situation. Again, that should leave people optimistic that they will have a good relationship. Obviously, Trump had that little dust up with Claudia Sheinbaum over the weekend over reports that, which he's since confirmed, he offered to assist the cartel crackdown with some U.S. troops, and Sheinbaum used that as an opportunity to flex her own muscles at maintaining Mexican sovereignty. It started with a media leak, so she had to get out in front of that and all of that. But Trump, I think probably also knows that, like he knew it with Carney. We'll see if that permanently sours his relationship with Scheinbaum. I suspect it won't. I think she has been very clever. But with both sides in Canada and Mexico, their people, their voters, care very much about their sovereignty, and they do not want to be pushed around by the United States of America. They don't want to feel like their country is being pushed around by the United States of America, even though, of course, their countries can be pushed around by the United States of America. So whether or not that's right is another question. Whether or not that's conducive to the relationship is another question. But it was quite a day with Mark Carney. People expected fireworks, and they did not get it. And I think that is to Carney's credit, and I think that is to Trump's credit. They both did what they had to do. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to subscribe over at undercurrents.tv for a premium experience. You get paywalled episodes. You get a private email address, a weekly newsletter, so private emails to ask us your questions we can answer on episodes of the show. Also subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube too, and we will be back here with more soon.